Boy, oh boy, is this administration with President Obama handing the union a silver platter with a steak and all the trimmings and all the sides, with all the new rules and all the new laws that have been passed to make it easier for unions to organize. I'm joined by Cliff Hammond, partner with Nemeth Law in Detroit, Kellen Meyer, an attorney with Nemeth Law, and Ricardo Torres, the president and CEO of Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants. And today we will see how deep this goes and how it affects employers across America. Welcome to today's episode of PSLabor Talk. As many of you know that keep up in the news, there's been a Fight for 15 campaign going on for quite some time, and that's what many people are viewing as an attack on a long-lasting work model. But it goes way deeper than just McDonald's and Burger King. Multi-agencies throughout the government are changing their ways of thinking, trying to go back to a workplace model that started 40, 50 years ago. And I'm here with Cliff Hammond, with Kellen Myers and Rick Torres today to talk about what's happening with the National Labor Relations Board and other agencies on how they're trying to make this shift. It's a multi-agency attack on the so-called fissured workplace that's happening right now. And it goes way deeper than just McDonald's. And then everybody in this room thinks it's important that all employers know that these changes are coming. Anyone that uses a temp service or contracts works out, they will be affected. So I want to start with Kellen. Kellen, what is the board's new joint employment standard, and how is this different than what we're so used to?
Sure. So previously, like the past 30 years, the board had this standard where you weren't an employer or a joint employer unless you exercised actual control over the employees. So if you just had a contract with a temp agency and you didn't tell the employees how to do their work, but you contracted with, okay, we need X number of employees to come in and do this job, then you weren't a joint employer. Now the board is saying is if you have this ability to exercise control, so not direct control, but kind of a potential control idea, then you can be a joint employer.
So even small companies that their whole existence and the whole reason they survive and succeed in business that use these outside agencies to fill the gaps, they're in big trouble. But it's also affecting large companies because half their workforce could be contracted out or done through temp services.
Sure, and you see that even with one of the employers you're talking about, McDonald's. I think they only actually employ or operate like 30% of their franchises, whereas if this standard stays in place, then they could potentially be on the hook for all their franchises.
And Cliff, we saw this. We were almost one of the first cases in the country where this could have very well been a big battle.
Right. Just before all these regulations went into place, we had a campaign where the majority of the people interested in the union were actually temp employees from multiple agencies. They were a significant component of the workforce, and they were the angriest part of the workforce. And so you can see that if you were in labor and you were organizing, this change to a potential employer status could be significant for your organizing abilities.
Kellen, you said franchises, and that's what we've seen in the news. Mm-hmm. Most people assume franchises are the targets. Mm-hmm. Who else is affected?
Well, temp agencies, staffing agencies, and even some of these government agencies are going after like independent contractors. So the Department of Labor has made a huge deal in the past, last year and then this year as well, as far as trying to change what they consider an employee is under their statutes, so even independent contractors.
That's something that we've seen because Rick and I, we follow petitions that are filed with the board every day, and we're seeing quite a few temp agencies popping up on there where we wouldn't see that 1 year, 2 years ago. We would very rarely see a temp agency. How big of a problem is this becoming? So how widespread is it?
Well, the biggest problem you have is when the decision came down, this lead point decision in California, what the dissent, the one board chairman from the NLRB said is, you got a big problem because if you have a company who's organized, who provides services for your company, it becomes this almost entangled mess, because you now have to have an obligation. If you have a contract with that company, no matter who it is, if it's a cleaning company, if it's somebody who's just doing maintenance on your company from time to time, if you have a contract saying here's how much we're going to pay you, and that cleaning company has a contract, and there's this idea that, well, then you're interrelated because you're directing them and becoming their joint employer, here's the problem. Now they can drag you into negotiations for that concept. All of a sudden, you've been separate, you've had contracts, you've let them do whatever they've got to do as far as hiring, firing, doing all the forms and taxes, and for internal revenue purposes and for employment purposes, you've always been separate. Now you're going to be in a labor situation. Then the next question is going to be, okay, well, whatever, I'll just go to the table and say, sorry, my bottom line is my bottom line because I'm allowed to do that. Okay, well, what about the pickets? What about the potential for labor disruption? But even more than that, because that's the worst case scenario. Let's talk about the real world. If there's a request for information, see, during negotiations, you can ask for documents, and that document goes to, well, what is your contract? And you have a contractor who has a contract with you, but you have multiple contracts with multiple companies, and they're asking you for your contract with them. What if you contract with a lesser rate with that company than you do with somebody else? Now all of a sudden that might be publicly disclosed. That's a big deal. Then you've got another problem, because what if you decide you don't want to have that contractor anymore? Well, is it because of the fact that you've been pulled into negotiations? Now do you have an unfair labor practice? What if that company does something to their employees, they allege it's unfair labor practice against the law for labor laws, and you're being drugged down to the National Labor Relations Board to answer because you're also a joint employer? Are you responsible? So you can see this thing balloons up into issues and areas we've never seen before. So the crackdown on who does it apply to? It can apply to anybody who use outside sources, and then the ramifications can become larger. And what we're seeing is it's not just direct control. It's not just whether you indirectly control, like you tell them, well, here's the times you have to show up and the times you have to end. That might get you in trouble. But if you have something in your employment contract that says, look, I can tell you I don't want this person working on the job, but you've never applied it in 40 years. If that potential control exists, then you all of a sudden potentially could be a joint employer with all the ramifications of negotiations and all the ramifications of penalties involved. So you add that to the other agencies out there under the the Patient Protection Act, the ACA, the Obamacare. I mean, there are other standards being applied by different agencies that are a little bit different, and they're saying whether you're a joint employer or employer, those agencies are looking at different employers for responsibility and liability. You got Department of Labor looking at whether a contractor is or is not really your employer. So you have different standards in different agencies, but they're all doing the same thing, which is looking at the model. Who is the boss and who's responsible if there's a violation of these laws? And so the NLRB is essentially lockstep with the review. And I think as an employer, you have to really look at it. And you guys are seeing it now. Traditionally, when you organized, you had some places you could go and not go. If you were an organizer, it didn't make sense to go after certain groups because it wasn't going to get you into the large group you wanted to go to. That may be changing. I guess Rick can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, Rick, real quick, I've been seeing on the petitions that the words "as joint employer," and that had to. You've been out of the union now for 15, 16 years now, but at one time you were an organizing director. That phrase at the time would have made you salivate. I would guess. My question for you is, back then, you weren't organizing many temp agencies. You weren't organizing many contracting companies. What effect will that have now on how easy it is for unions to organize different companies?
Well, let's talk about the franchises like McDonald's. In fact, I wrote a paper with Richard Bensinger, who was the organizing director of the AFL-CIO years ago at the George Meany Institute. One of the things that really causes problems with it, like Cliff was talking, is that the whole franchise setup is geared towards individuals taking ownership of their own stores. What this will do, in effect, is to make the corporation take more accountability for such minute things as hiring and firing, discipline, write-up. So it kind of wipes out the whole system. In the past, I've even seen companies who have had, made up their own temp agencies, and it was part of their corporate structure. And there's nothing we could have done about it before. What this does is take McDonald's, for instance. If there was one successful organizing attempt, we could get McDonald's at the table. And until now, the organized franchises like McDonald's or Burger King or any other small franchise restaurant, you would have to piecemeal it. Now this opens the opportunity for many other things. You can go at them on a much larger scale, but to get there, you would have to damage the whole corporate structure and make it so costly to the corporation, to like McDonald's, for instance, that they would eventually give in to the organizing attempts, because it wouldn't be worth it, and in effect a huge corporate organizing campaign.
Well, combine this with the quickie election rules. What are the unions thinking right now? What's going on in their heads right now, based on your experience when you were in the unions?
Well, I think we can see it. I think what they're applying to organizing franchises is the mob rule. The 15-hour, we demand 15 hours, the mob rule, go and take over. And I think that it would be beneficial to the organizing attempts to even make a couple of the stores close, because they couldn't handle all the protests and all in all the class actions that we see coming through.
Yeah, to go to Rick's point, McDonald's is currently litigating with the board 116 unfair labor practice charges across 31 franchises in one consolidated proceeding right now with the board. And I think that's very costly for them to have to deal with.
Well, it's very costly, but it hurts their image also. I mean, if they start having boycotts, look at McDonald's anyways. The business has gone down over the years. They've been a victim of organizations coming at them as far as the healthiness of the food and many other things. But they're going to have to create a whole nother department to be able to handle all of these things. And it's not just so much the litigation and the resources that they have to take out of running their corporation, but it's trying to deal with the backlash of the bad publicity that they're going to get.
And the biggest thing that you see coming out of this is a flexibility model that hasn't been there before for unions, because what you can do is address the size, and Kel and I had talked about this before, how you can address your needs based on the situation and apply it, because the law is more flexible today than it was 5 years ago, that basically it ever has been. If you want to go after a small group, the micro unit allows you to do that potentially. If you want to go after a name brand, you can do it in a big, massive campaign to fight for 15, or you can do a micro unit, get inside, demand information, bring people to the table, do strikes at places you might not have been able to do picket lines at places you might not have been able to do in the past. You can exert appropriate levels of stress if you have a coordination and you have the resources and you have the will to do it, now that you could never do before. So there is a level of, let's get everybody to the table through the regulations and the rulemaking processes. So when you drag a McDonald's in and 100 plus unfair labor practices for the sole purpose of saying, look, if you are the type of person who wants to look from your business standpoint at point of sales, point of, how many hours of labor are you using? Are you keeping records of how much money people are making at your franchises? Then they're going to say, then you're not going to be separate, and you're going to be drug in, and we're going to be able to attack your name brand. We're going to be able to attack your partners in the community. But at the same time, we want to be able to get into an individual franchise, at least organize one place, get into that place if they haven't been successful, and then all of a sudden you can do everything from the inside.
And Cliff, that's easy to do, because the turnover rate at say a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Subway, the turnover rate's tremendous. It's very easy for a local union that's coordinating with the international to put people into those restaurants and to rig the vote. It's very easy for them to do that. It's a small average McDonald's. I'm not sure how many employees that they would have, but I would imagine it's a small amount. To be able to do that and infiltrate a McDonald's or a franchise like about that size would be easy to do. Win an election, now you have the whole corporation that has to come to the table, and you can start making demands, and it just snowballs from that point.
And for our average listener, they may think that's illegal, but it's perfectly legal, isn't it, to have the union put somebody in that position?
It happens all the time. As an organizing director across the country, we used to put in salts all the time to enter a company or business and infiltrate it and start causing a disruption within the facility, start causing problems.
One of the biggest problems you've got, though, is if you were to organize pragmatically one McDonald's, what's going to happen to that McDonald's if all of a sudden that place is paying $15 an hour, great benefits, it's an amazing place to work? Are you going to be competitive with your other franchises? And the question generally would, the answer would be no. But if you can put maximum pressure in mass crowds and mass amounts on the larger organization, or more than just one fast food restaurant, more than just McDonald's, all of a sudden now you may have to cause, because of the brand identification, them to raise prices across the board. Now, if the union comes in to organize just for hours of work and for conditions of work, if money is not the issue anymore, if really you're not as uncompetitive because of the pricing model only, it becomes a more palatable issue for you to go individually into one place.
Well, and I think that's exactly the long-term vision that the unions have. They don't want to go into one McDonald's and organize and get them up to 15 hours. They want to make this bringing the corporation in. They don't want to have the piecemeal the organizing. They want to go after the corporation and organize on a large scale, and that's the whole purpose of them putting millions of dollars into this nationwide campaign, as far as boycotts and protests and everything else. If they can put pressure. The bottom line is this, and it's always been this, is to cost the company as much money as possible, to hurt it as much as possible, the corporate image, to get them to come to the table and say, okay, let's talk.
And that's why this campaign has been what it is right now. It's in front of the National Labor Relations Board because you've had this mass momentum that's been going on for 3-4 years now with these 15-hour. They've hit a threshold. They've hit some milestones where they've gotten some pay increases. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to affect some change. And legally, what the National Labor Relations Board did by filing this lawsuit is they brought McDonald's corporate into a place where they could be responsible for the individual actions of all their thousands and thousands of individual franchises. That's a game changer if they win this litigation. It hasn't been won yet, but if they can make that company responsible for individual issues, then you can do whatever you want to as far as organizing on the ground. Whether you win an organizing campaign or not, doesn't matter. It's still an economic driver that hits the bottom line value of the company.
It comes right down to the core of what McDonald's is. The number is actually 10%.
Oh, sure.
That corporation owns, and 90% that they franchise out. So if you can attack that core of the business, the way that they've been able to expand their company and their name brand all over the country, all over the world, by going after what has driven that force, which is the franchise model, then you have the ability to damage the corporation, because now the individual franchise owners have the ability to run their business. So you have to come to some kind of an agreement, because if not, then you're going to force the corporation into having to make those choices for the franchise owners, individuals, and that kills any incentive for a individual to come in and to buy a franchise. I'm thinking that this is really goes down to the core of it.
Well, if you're a small business person, one of the easiest ways to get into business is to go into a franchise model, because a lot of the heavy lifting's already been done. The name recognition in that brand brings customers to you. Number two, the technology that a lot of these places like a McDonald's, but even the smaller startup ones can give you, is they give you tracking models for, hey, are you using labor properly? Labor is very expensive if you can get that down the key. What the general counsel in the NLRB has done is he's filed a complaint and said, essentially, those things that you're getting the help from, the tracking mechanism, how long does it take you to fill an order for a customer, those type of things indicate that you're a joint employer. So the things that make it easier and more effective to be in that type of business from an investor as a franchisor are the things that are being attacked. And I think that's what people sometimes overlook with this. It's not about the money and it's not about corporations. At the bottom line, the legal aspect of this attack is the things that have been successful are under attack. That relationship, that structure of business is being said, that's not an independent relationship. That's not you, small businessman, owning one McDonald's or one Subway or whatever it is. It's about whether or not the actual corporate entity is really their employer. And what happens is, because of that legal question, you're getting all these other people that are getting in here. Of course, the labor issues, they're utilizing that. And if they're smart and if they're able to exercise it, it could be a game changer.
Well, there's got to be a balance. I mean, you look at the marketing for franchise owner, or someone to come and invest in a franchise, and you hear people on every marketing piece that you see on TV or radio, and you hear people saying, "I wanted to be my own boss, so that's why I bought this franchise," and that takes it away. That takes away from it, which puts pressure on the corporation. So how much is that going to be a factor when it comes to unions really pushing the issues, and corporation having to respond, because they've never had to respond before?
I mean, that's one of the defenses that McDonald's is trying to make right now at the board, is this kind of a brand protection defense. And so essentially they're saying that we have to be able to exert certain amounts and certain types of control to maintain our brand, to maintain our model. That's how we're successful, is we're selling this to franchisees. And if we can't do that, then we're going to be out of business. So far, the board hasn't looked favorably upon that. The ALJ had some harsh words for it in their opinion. The board also agreed. So whether or not they're able to utilize that going forward is going to be a question.
And one of the things I think that unions are looking at here, in labor in general, as well as the board, even when they say it, is that use of temporary employees has exploded. It's just exploded. It's a major component of the American workforce. There's tons of people. And I think that there's a policy decision behind the legal decisions. When they looked at it, it said it's a realities test. We got to stop these little blurry lines about, what's this corporate structure versus that corporate structure. They're saying if you exercise control, direct control, or you could direct control, then the bottom line is you should be responsible for your actions. And that's a fundamental change from what's been really an exciting market for a lot of people. The other thing that's going on is you see that the franchises have just exploded too. It's not like just McDonald's, but if you go drive around America, it used to be you go to small towns, you see the independent chains. Now they're there, but you also see the same businesses across the country. But it's not just here; it's worldwide. You see Europe. The biggest market for the explosion is in Europe. So it's not an American thing only. This is part of the trend that you're seeing. So when these laws are being redressed by the NLRB, by the EEOC, by the Department of Labor, there's a reason why they're doing that, because what they're seeing is the way we've applied the law in the past has allowed for companies to utilize that law to be successful. We're going to go ahead, now that you've built your business on it and looked at the future for it, we're going to change it. And I think companies have to understand that dynamic change has to go in part of what your business plan is in the future. Otherwise, you could be in a situation where you're responsible for something you never envisioned.
Which would be collective bargaining. That really hit me when I started thinking about doing this podcast. Collective bargaining is going to be a mess.
Well, you see, Bob, one of the things that why you're reading, because how this is going to be so beneficial to union organizing and regrowing the rank and file membership. You're looking at, like in manufacturing, and we dealt with this not too long ago. You're looking at the fact that you're going after the manufacturer, but they have a large temp workforce. Some of the most dissatisfied, unhappy workers in this country today are temp workers, because there's no guarantee. So what can they lose? And
some of these firms use 4 or 5 temp agencies in one spot.
Absolutely. And now you're holding, we talk about everything from, FMLA. A small temp agency has 25 workers. Well, they don't have enough to qualify the workers to go on FMLA. So now if they're a joint employer through the corporation, through the company that's hiring the temp agencies, now all of a sudden they have more than sufficient amount of workers to make them eligible for FMLA, right?
Yeah, I think both Rick and Cliff hit the nail on the head as far as what these agencies are seeing is kind of this huge undercurrent where in their opinion, employers are kind of bypassing these statutes. So generally for coverage under various statutes, you have to have a certain number of employees, or you even have to be considered an employee or an employer. So traditionally, kind of the definition for an employee under these statutes is an employee employed by an employer, which is a circular. It doesn't make any sense. So they've interpreted that over time through various methods, such as like common law or economic realities. But long story short is these different employment models, independent contractors and staffing agencies and temp agencies and things like that, the government agencies see them as kind of bypassing these statutes. So you're not covered under the FEMA unless you have a certain number of employees. So if you're able to define more people as employees or employers, then now they're bringing more businesses in.
The collective bargaining model that we've used in the past may be changing and never coming back to where it was. Yeah, currently, if you have a person like Rick was talking about who is a temp agency employee, they very much could be working side by side with a person doing a very similar job, but their take-home pay, their benefits, their structure, I mean, everything they know is completely different than the person they're working next to. And if there's ever an organizing campaign, they have different elections. They're separate. If they ever have one for the guy who's a temp, who may be there for a month or 2 months, or maybe a year. We've been in places where there's been, temps are just part of the service for a long period of time. They could be there for years. But what happens if the NLRB, which has addressed this and they're looking at it, says, you know what, since you're so similarly situated, even if you have two companies, we're going to drag both companies, whoever you are, to the table at the same time, and we're going to have one election and one bargaining table for everybody. And that's what happens with this idea of using the temp employees, and let's have the other employees of the company, let's call them joint employers, and let's have a bargaining unit, and then let's have 15 different groups come to the table. If you've got 4 temp services, well, let's bring all 4 of the temp services together, let's bring the other, and then we have 5 people on one side of the room, and 3 of them agree, but 2 of them don't agree, and you're gonna try to get a deal with that. It causes acrimony whenever you have just one side of the table. When you have multiple heads at the table, there's a pragmatic problem that sometimes arises because not everybody. I mean, imagine if McDonald's is at the table with its franchises. Do you think McDonald's has the same goals, the same concerns? I mean, it doesn't have the same financial problems that maybe a small business owner would have. That's just the big picture. Then you start talking about hours of work and things about, well, yeah, I'm willing to do that, but McDonald's says no. If you're an employer that uses temps, your temp agency might not be able to withstand certain restrictions that the company could. So there are pragmatic and legal concerns with this change, but I think people need to come to terms with the fact that it's a successful model. It has been a successful model, and it's so big and so growing that everybody knows it's going to continue, and that's why it's been such a ripe area for pressure, because everybody knows it's one of those places that probably isn't going to go away. It's going to continue to grow, so they're putting pressure on it.
Well, the franchise system has been in place in this country since the 1850s. In the 1930s is when it really got popular with restaurants like McDonald's and White Castles and others. But I think what it's going to do is the litigation is going to be tremendous. Now you're looking at issues when you have small temp agencies that are at the table with other companies or with other temp agencies. How do they continue to exist? And does that cut down the options of companies on how they get their employees? You're talking about strike issues. You're talking about so many issues. It's going to bring such. It's going to bring a lot of these companies to a standstill.
Hey, Kel and I were talking about this before. One of the things that you have to worry about is the brand idea, the brand concept. I mean, people stop in at McDonald's because they know the name. They might not know the mom and pop shop that might be better, but when they're driving down the interstate, that's a name they know, that's a name they trust, so they go in. But when you try to protect that brand by putting contracts together that say, here are the things you need to do to make sure that when people stop at our restaurant in California, New York, or anywhere in between, it's the same thing. Those are the type of things that are on the table right now as far as attack to say you are. So there's a business model sense, and then there's a legal attack. And you tell employers, well, you have to plan ahead. But even planning ahead, you have to understand there are always consequences, and that's what's being attacked.
But the thing about it is if you look at the large franchise owners like McDonald's, Burger King, they do move when there's pressure put on them. You remember a few years back when the nutritional groups were really attacking the fast food industry because of the nutritional value of their foods. So what have they done? They've changed the menus. They've changed how the grease. They've changed many of things because of the pressure, because they want to keep that brand name. They want people to say, okay, this is great. McDonald's, doesn't matter whether it's in San Francisco or in Detroit or Chicago. It doesn't matter. We're getting the same thing. So they did succumb to pressure. And the question is, I think, is that how much will they succumb to it again when the unions really start putting millions and millions of dollars attacking their corporate brand, which they have put probably billions of dollars into making and protecting.
You know what I believe to be true? There's a lot of business owners out there that are in the industries that feel, I don't use temp workers, I don't use contract workers, this doesn't really affect me at all. But the truth of the matter is there's a trickle-down effect, isn't there? There's a lot more industries that are affected when you really take a view from the mile high down. Does this affect all employers? What other industry does it affect?
Well, personally, I think the point I want to make is this, and then I'll pass it on to Kellen and Cliff. This is not happening in a vacuum. This is just one step. I think you need to look at the whole picture of what is happening in labor over the last 5-8 years. What's happening as far as the laws that are changed. We remember back years ago when the unions tried to pass the card, what they call the card check law, right? And it failed. But if you look at the past 6-7 years, what's happening is everything that they tried to get in one big package is coming in through the back door. They're piecemealing out everything and more that was in that card check bill. And they're getting them. And slowly but surely, they're getting everything that was in that bill and more. So I think that you have to look at it in a bigger scope. That this is what's going to happen, and if the Democrats get in again, we're going to see a continuation of this path that we're going down. Where it's going to be harder and harder for companies to stay union free.
I think other industries are going to be impacted. One that comes to mind right away is healthcare. Temp nursing is everywhere. Almost every hospital has temp nurses from multiple agencies. Probably.
Well, that's right on point, Bob. In fact, that's the first thing that happens when there's a strike. The only thing that protects a hospital during a strike is they have to hire temp nurses to come in. And I've seen them where they've been there for a year or 2 years, making sure that the health of the patients continues on a high level while the nurses or others walk out on strike. So yeah, absolutely, it strikes to the heart of those organizations.
Well, I think what you always see is, and you always see this, whenever the market has to shift to keep ahead. So if you have a coordinated campaign of, look, we're trying to restructure what is and is not an employer, at the same time as you're running massive protests and all over the place about $15 an hour, and you start seeing wages change, either because companies are trying to head off the whole issue and say, well, wait a minute, we're paying our employees a lot more than you say we are, or two, because people all of a sudden in politics say, well, no, we need to have a minimum wage increase, even if it's not $15 an hour. It's going to affect everybody, because that then has a trickle-down effect to every operation that's going on, whether it be somebody who doesn't use temps at all, doesn't use franchise, doesn't use any subcontractors. The bottom line is the market, if it's dynamically shifted because of this campaign and because of these laws, even if you wanted to start using temps, you have to know what the responsibility is. Even if you don't want to use a contractor, if you do, that contractor all of a sudden now, what's the relationship going to be in a contract? And then your bottom line is your wages for your employees. Are you going to be able to pay your employees what you currently pay them and get quality people to stay, or not? And so this is a significant change, and Rick's right. When you have faster elections, you have bigger and smaller elections. You now have an issue where you can put a lot of corporate pressure potentially if this thing goes through. I mean, it's in a different way of EFCA, but it is essentially getting people to a point where significant pressure can be put on you to accept the union as opposed to having an election. And that's the goal. Don't have an election, have pressure, and then make work change.
Well, if you look over the years, you look at organizing campaigns and the percentage of whether it's going up or down in any given year, you're never looking at the elections that happen or the organizing campaigns that happen off the NLRB records. When you're talking about neutrality clauses, when you're talking about card check, when you're talking about these other things that an individual company can make an agreement with a union, those things are not applied to the numbers that we're looking at. So this is, and you're absolutely right, Cliff, these are the things that the union wants to get. It's easier to organize, and I was a corporate campaign coordinator before, it's easier to organize the company versus organizing the employees.
Right, because that's the long-term effect. You're not organizing those individuals. You're you're organizing that company.
Yeah.
And that company's going to be with that union for a long time
Right.
once it ever
Right.
gets there. So you can have 100 failed campaigns, but all you do is win one.
Right,
And,
right.
and you're in there for life. But that kind of gets to the legal pragmatics of moving forward. If I'm an employer and I'm seeing all these changes to the law, do I expect it to slow down? No. I mean, what's happening now are changes to how the election process works. But like Rick said, if you can effectuate enough pressure through charge after charge and cost of litigation, sometimes that leads to what you were talking about, the neutrality agreements. Neutrality agreements means in order to protect the brand's name from these constant attacks, we'll allow, if everybody agrees they won't run down the other side and say nasty things for a certain period of time, go ahead and have an election at these particular areas. Well, that increases the likelihood that you probably will succeed in an election, number one. But it also, what it does is it allows the company to stop the campaign against it in return for what? Well, just because they don't attack you doesn't mean they can't keep pressing the same issues against another company and vicariously back through you, through some other third party. So it really does allow a one-sided pressure to continue. Whether or not unions are going to be able to take advantage of that, it's to be seen. But at least the playing field changes.
Well, Cliff, is when you're talking about corporate campaigns, I mean, they have been over the years pretty successful at it. It just doesn't get a lot of the publicity as other campaigns that happen in this country every day. But if you're looking at the whole purpose and the whole philosophy behind corporate campaigns, it's the same thing with strikes. And I was a strike director. Is that you hurt the company as much as possible, to damage them as much as possible, to where they have to make the decision. And this is the whole goal, the core of whether it's corporate campaign or a strike. Give them two decisions: either you stay in business with the union, or you go out of business without the union. And that's the whole goal, to bring them to the table, is to hurt them to the point to where they have to come to the table and saying the alternative is not acceptable, so we'll sit down and talk to the union. I mean, that's the bottom line.
And I think these new rules give the unions a level of flexibility to do that maybe we've never seen before even.
Oh, I agree with you. 100%.
But it also gives an incentive for unions to be patient and to push the campaign in a public atmosphere and through an administrative legal atmosphere, as opposed to having to sign people up. There's no need to actually go out there and do let's just say you're a company who doesn't use temps. You're a company that doesn't franchise. But the market that you're in is one that's being targeted with this major campaign. That doesn't mean you won't be affected by an organizing campaign once the conditions are set. Because that's the goal. Get the conditions right and then go organize.
Well, you're absolutely right, Cliff. In fact, when unions look at, and we put it out, and I've had thousands of meetings, on a national level, where you look at in any industry, where is our union density? For them to take hold of the ability to control that industry, they have to have a strong union density within it. So whether you fall right in line with whether you have temps or you don't have temps, it doesn't matter, because you're going to be affected, because they're going after that industry and to try to create as much union density in that industry as much as possible.
One of the things that's under real attack is the pattern handbooks that are given out by franchises. Sometimes what will happen is you'll have a corporate agreement saying, here's standard principles we probably think you should use. You can or can't use them, it's up to you, but you want to use them. Well, that could be used to say, well, look, you're trying to tell people how to work and you're trying to control things. If you don't use those, then what are you going to do? Make them up yourself? Well, the NLRB has put out memorandums, and they've been going after in litigation employers for what you would think would be, for most employers who have no idea about the NLRA or unions, they would think, well, that's pretty standard stuff. You can't be insubordinate or disrespectful to other employees. Well, that's going to be scrutinized, that particular work rule. So that's an attack on speech that has never been done to non-union employers before. Not that it's right or wrong, I'm just saying that's an attack. So what you see is a curtailment on what you can say in handbooks through a litigation effort that has come down from the NLRB at the request of unions. On the other hand, employers have the right to have campaign discussions with their employees. So if you ever get hit with a petition, one of the things you do, and obviously what Rick and Bob have done for years, is they talk to employees, because there's a First Amendment right for employers to say, look, these are the facts about unions, this is a fact about us. Now, that particular area has stayed the same for a long time. But if you're not allowed to have a handbook on the other side that gives legitimate reasons for why you're disciplining people, or at least the legitimate reasons you thought were legitimate are now unlawful, it really is going to cut down into what you can and you can't say. So not only do you have the external effects of these large campaigns and who's the employer, who's not the employer, there is this pressure on having employers not have the relationship and set the rules down that they used to be able to set. So it gives a little more flexibilities to employees who were looking to organize. They
Well,
can
you
push
know,
the limit.
and you're talking about the freedom of speech clause in the act, and I think that's been the base of companies being able to communicate to the workers and educate the workers during organizing campaigns. I mean, but even that is under attack. I mean, 2 months ago there was a letter signed by 106 law professors from around the country that was attacking that rule as far as what employers could say to the workers. In fact, they are pointing out that that if a company chooses to use and have meetings with their employees, that they have to also allow the union to come in and speak to their employees on company time. And the same fact, in fact, reading the petition, and I read the petition last week, it was even saying that one-on-one conversations was being interpreted as meetings. So that what I'm reading into it, even if you had one-on-one conversations and not group meetings, you would still be obligated to have the union come in and talk one-on-one with your employees. Also, what kind of havoc would that put on a company?
Well, I mean, you've been in these campaigns.
Well,
Imagine
right.
If you could have access, and of course it's not there yet, but if that was allowed, if a union during a union campaign could have equal time and equal access on the floor of your non-union facility, that may change the dynamic of any election. It might not just be about what's the fact. You're going to have all of a sudden this level of tension in your workplace rise to the roof.
Production is going to know.
Production is going to know that, and they also point out it's just like the Railroad Act. In the railroad and the airline industries, the remedy, they don't allow companies to have mandatory meetings, group meetings. The remedy for that is what the petitioners want for other NLRB elections, is that you throw out the ruling, you throw out the election, and have another election. If the company chooses to have group meetings, whether it be one-on-one or in large groups, if they choose to have it and not allow the union to come in the same accessibility, then they throw out the ruling and you have another election. Well, I mean, that would just bring companies to a standstill, because we know the first thing that happens when there's a union organizing campaign is production goes out the window.
And the other part about this is that, so you're starting to see an increased level of scrutiny on what you can and can't say to employees. And the other thing that you're seeing now, and it just got the final rule published, maybe Kelly can talk a little bit about it, about the persuader rules. And that's a significant aspect of what people can and can't say to employees as well.
Sure. Yeah, the DOL recently came out with new regulations that are going to really impact employers and also different companies, whether it's attorneys or labor consultants, as far as what they have to report to the Department of Labor.
Kellen, assume that this joint employer standard stays in effect. What is the long-term impact going to be for the labor unions?
I think it really depends on whether or not they take advantage of all these new rules and all these new regulations that are providing them a better playing field than they've ever had. I don't know if we've seen them take advantage of different things before, and the question is whether or not they're going to do that now.
It's kind of like you play hockey, I play hockey. It'd be like my team playing your team, but your team only gets to play with one arm behind your back.
Sure, exactly. and the board's doing things that are also impacting, like Cliff was saying, non-union employers. So whether or not these things do have an impact in the long term, it'll be interesting to see.
What about Cliff, for employers in general? What's the long-term impact going to be for them?
Well, I think they're going to have to be more attuned to what they can and can't do, and they're going to have to review their rules, because we see large, very sophisticated organizations that have no unions being drugged in front of the National Labor Relations Board and spending a lot of money and a lot of time talking about very minute details in handbooks and whether they're legal or not, and spending tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So from an employer standpoint, you're either going to have to get more sophisticated or you're going to throw your hands up in the air. And I think that those that throw their hands up in the air, they're gonna pay more in the long run than they will in the short run for just taking time to do preventative maintenance. Because this isn't just simply building a new store; it's the maintenance of that store, and that's exactly what they're gonna do. It's preventative maintenance, and they have to understand that some of the things they're gonna do are going to be reportable under new regulations and stuff. So it's going to be a transparency issue. So from an employer standpoint, the new world that you have to deal with is, if you ignore the reality of the changes in the laws, you most likely will be susceptible to some problems. Even if you're right, you're going to have to pay. And if you believe you're in the targets in an industry that's being targeted, you definitely need to get on top of this, talk to the right people, get yourself ahead of it. And it's not necessarily being union or anti-union, it's being knowledgeable. I mean, the bottom line is you have to know what you're getting into, because that's a cost you can't allow your investors and your shareholders to allow you not to be on top of.
We're running out of time, but I want to ask the $1 million question here. There are a ton of temp agencies and staff agencies out there, just a ton of them, all over the country. What's the future? What's the future for the temp agencies, and what's the futures for the franchises?
I think it's going to be a growth industry. I think it's going to continue to grow, but I think the consequences are going to be bigger. I think the potential for overtime lawsuits, I think the potential for violations of Obamacare, I think the potential for organizing, and I think the potential for potential remedies under labor laws are all going to increase. The price of doing business is going to go up as you become a bigger and bigger chunk of the economy. So I think employers are going to think about using temp services, and there may be a consolidation. The small guy might not be in business anymore because some of the regulations might be so difficult to understand that they may start consolidating into larger companies. But at the end of the day, there's an opportunity out there. There's a need for temps. There's a need for these guys. But the rules are going to make it more and more difficult for you to operate unless you're sophisticated. And so employers, when they're using them, are going to change their contracts.
So you think hospitals and Tier 1 automotive suppliers who traditionally use these services are going to continue to use them and not move to a direct-to-hire model?
I think that what you've always seen is you see knee-jerk reactions where you will probably see some places reducing them and going all in-house with their employees. And then they're going to take a look at their employment model, and they're going to look back and say, we can make some changes, some tweaks. We could probably go back to what we were doing cheaper than having our own person in here. And I think other places are going to do it, and they'll say, hey, this works out great for us. Some people love temps, some people don't like temps, and I think it's going to be a taste. But I can't see an employer who's trying to grow but doesn't necessarily have a concrete adjustment in their long-term model where it really makes sense for them to hire their own people. Why not use a temp agency? Why not use an independent contractor, but do it the right way and understand there are risks inherent with it, and then make that. So I can't see, and especially the franchise industry, the brand just makes sense. It's a very good way. It's just the problem is, like everything else, there are going to be regulations.
I think that, and I agree with you, Cliff, I think that the mom and pop temp agencies are gonna go away, like the dinosaur. I also think that the cost, because they're gonna be bigger companies, less companies but much bigger. I think that you're gonna see, and there's gonna be more monopoly. I think you're gonna see the price of using that service, to skyrocket. I still think that a lot of companies are gonna use them, but I think that the price is gonna be higher. Where it might affect healthcare, because the price already is tremendous. But because you have a specific skill, especially in nursing, you're gonna have a lot of hospitals rethink what the negotiating strategy is going to be when they negotiate with the unions, especially when it comes to nurses, because they're going to take that cost increase as a factor on how they negotiate.
Kellen, you've done a lot of studying on this. What do you think the long-term impact's going to be?
Well, I think a lot of these businesses are just going to have to build this into their business model. I think it's clear that the legal landscape is changing, not only from a labor perspective, but also from general employment laws. When you look at what the Department of Labor is saying, what the EEOC is saying, employers have to be more aware of these changes. And if they're not, it's going to cost them and they're going to go out of business.
We got to wrap up. No matter what side you're on, whether you're on the left or the right, you're going to have an opinion on this. My take is this is going to have an effect on the business model throughout the United States, and a lot of adjustments are going to have to be made. In my opinion, one thing that has not changed, it did change because it's even more important, is people who thought that they were inoculated from this type of change coming from the government now have to take proactive action more seriously. It has to become an annual thing, something that's built into their orientation and something that they work with their management teams on an annual basis. Wouldn't you all agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's it for today's episode of PSLabor Talk. Kellen, it was your first time here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Cliff, always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
And of course, Rick, great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Bob.